that you don't have to believe the truth. You can be the truth. But for people who don't yet recognize that, they're still operating from a belief perspective about it. You know, having faith. I have faith in God. You know what I mean? I have faith in God. But people who have had the awakening experience don't need faith in God. They have a direct experience of God. So one of the things I wanted to just mention today is that the big barrier to self-realization, the big barrier to freedom is fear. And I think it's important to be clear about that. And so in your own process, right, in your own practice, if you're paying attention and if you're looking at what's occurring, at some point you will come upon fear, you know, fear of letting go. If I let go, what will happen? Fear of not being who I thought I was. If I stop being who I thought I was, what will happen? Maybe I'll disappear, maybe I'll go crazy, like that. Or fear of the future, right? This is another big one for people. Fear of death, fear of the future, fear of the inevitables, as the Buddha used to say, old age, sickness, and death. There are a lot of people, as they get older, they get more afraid all the time, you know, until they're like, you know, they're afraid of disease, they're afraid something, they become hypochondriacs, you know, become super concerned and afraid. So this business of fear is something that has to be dealt with in this process. It has to be dealt with. And it really is, as far as I can tell, a matter of being willing to take the leap, to kind of take the leap, you know, that whatever it is that you're afraid of, it's a release process. As those of you who have been interested in the Sedona method, it's a release process. Letting go of emotions is a release process. Letting go of fear is a release process. I remember when I was doing a Vipassana training up in New England, which is very challenging training. Anybody who's done it will tell you. It's 10 days, no speaking, meditation, an hour at a time, 8 to 9 hours a day for 10 days. And somewhere along the line, I think it was maybe Wednesday or Thursday of that week, when I was sitting in meditation, I started to notice in the belly, which is a place that people experience fear. You know, when you get scared, you know, if you get like terrified, you know, you can feel your belly, right, is terrified. So in the middle of practicing meditation, I started to feel this knot in the belly, and it had the quality of fear. You know, there was fear there. And then as I started to allow myself to be more aware of it, I noticed that my heart started to beat faster. You know, so now my heart's beating faster, and I have this fear going on in my belly, right? I'm sitting there, and then the next thing that happens, which is typical, anybody that's had a panic attack knows, the next thing that happens, you say, am I having a heart attack? You know? And then you say, nah, I'm not having that. But what if I am? You see, like that. And so, you know, and that was the experience I was having, right? And then at some point, thank goodness, because of, and this is why the development of the understandings is so important, because at that point, I referred to my understanding, and my understanding was that fear at some point will come for you. Fear at some point will be the barrier, right? And so when I recognized that, or when I remembered that from my understanding, what I did is I chose to let go. And choosing to let go at that time was choosing to die. In other words, if it is a heart attack and I'm going to die, so be it. Let that happen, right? Of course, as soon as I let go, it disappeared. So that's the way fear works, you know. Fear is only there and will only continue to be there as long as the way you relate to it, right, is that you try and control it or you resist it. Remember that axiom, anything that you resist persists. That's so important to remember, right, in life. If you resist fear, you get afraid of fear. And if you get afraid of fear, right, now you can't experience your fear because you're too afraid to experience fear. Now you're afraid of fear, right? Most people are afraid of fear, so they can't get to the fear to experience the fear. So what I'm talking about here is when that comes up for you, which it will, and it probably already has, or it's probably something you've been living your life, allowing it to run your life, when that comes up, look and see where is it expressing itself. It will always be definitely in the belly, right? And when it starts to express itself in the belly, allow yourself to give that attention. Just start paying attention to it in the belly. Just let your attention rest there and keep paying attention to it. Let the fear be there. Keep watching the fear. And the key is not to attempt to stop it, not to run away from it, not try and control it, right? Just be present to it. Just like I have been saying with a lot of things. The technology of awareness is that you learn through the process of practicing that whatever you shine your awareness on, right, has an effect on what it's shining on, right? Anything you pay attention to, that you hold your attention there, right, will have an effect on what you're paying attention to. So if you just watch the fear, right, like a witness, anything you just keep witnessing, stay with it and keep witnessing, right? The witnessing of it will have it change in the direction that's natural, which is and when it comes to fear, the natural direction of fear is for it to dissipate. As you pay attention to it, the natural direction of fear is to dissipate. I saw a video at one point, Sadhguru. How many of you know who Sadhguru is? He's another spiritual teacher, right? And so he's out there on YouTube and everything. And at one point I came across the YouTube video of Sadhguru meeting Mike Tyson. So I had to watch that, right? And you know what Mike Tyson said? When Sadhguru said to him, what is your question? Mike Tyson said, why am I always afraid? Mike Tyson, why am I always afraid? So, what you find out is that people like that, his life is about being strong, right? His life is about being able to dominate, right? And control what's going on. And his only question is, why am I always afraid? Okay? So fear is something that you want to start to include in your practice instead of running from it. One of the things that comes up in these teachings has to do with the idea that many famous spiritual teachers, like I mentioned the other day, that Alan Watts was an alcoholic and a womanizer. Nisargadatta died of throat cancer because he was a heavy smoker, right? I just mentioned this Zen master, who was a womanizer and a heavy drinker. And so you could look at that stuff and say, well, this doesn't make sense, You would think that these people would be different than that. Well, the thing about it, as far as I can tell, because I'm very interested in that myself, and the way that occurs for me is that there's a couple of things to consider here. One is that somebody like Ramana Maharshi, for example, who had died of cancer, he had a melanoma on his arm, right? And the way he related to the melanoma and the treatment for the melanoma was that he was, what's the best word? Not very interested in it. He wasn't very interested in it. Don't forget, this was a guy who used to go in the basement of a temple and go into a state of meditation for days and days and days without eating. They were taking care of his body until bugs were eating his body. People had to find him and take him out of there, otherwise he would have died. So that was the relationship he had with his body then. And the thing about it is that if somebody is a spiritual, evolved person and their identity is more the spirit than the body, can you understand that they wouldn't care? Because their life is a spiritual life. It's not a physical life. So they don't care. That death doesn't mean anything to them. What happens to the body doesn't mean anything to them. If you look at Nisargadatta's teaching in his famous classic book, I Am That, right? If you look at what he's teaching, what he talks about consistently in his teaching is that his identity is not physical. That's what he talks about in his teaching, that his experience of who he is, I am that, you see? I am that, I am not this, I am that, right? So his teaching is that he is not physical. And so for him to die of throat cancer, to him, it didn't mean anything. It didn't mean anything. So then you could say, well, how about people who say, like a lot of the modern Zen practitioners now, in the integral Zen, is a school of Zen called integral Zen. In integral Zen, what they teach is, once you have Kenso, once you've woken up, then you should do shadow work. Once you've woken up, you should do shadow work is psychotherapy. So they're saying once you've woken up, you should do psychotherapy, right? And so that's another way that I understand this, that Alan Watts didn't do psychotherapy. He was totally involved with the transcendental aspect of spirituality, transcending the physical body, transcending this life, right? And so if you're living in a transcendental state, then it's irrelevant what goes on in this life, because that's just conditioning. He was a traumatized child. In his later life, he became an alcoholic. In other words, the conditioning played out, right? And he didn't do anything to deal with the conditioning. He just transcended it. Because if you listen to Alan Watts, he was a tremendous teacher. He was very inspiring, right? He's very inspiring to listen. He was obviously very clear about the truth, okay? But when it came to his habits and when it came to his behavior, he was a womanizer and he was an alcoholic. Okay? Had he got involved in psychotherapy, it might have gone different. Then he might have dealt with his personality and became healthier in the way that he related to other people and the way that he took care of his body. Now, then beyond that, so you have those two ways of looking at it, right? Then beyond that, you have another way of looking at it, which is the ultimate way of looking at it, which is thy will be done. In the case of somebody who gets involved in dealing with a personality and getting their personality straightened out and getting their body straightened out, from a thy will be done perspective, that was the will of God operating in them. So the will of God had it be so that that's the life that they expressed, where another person, the will of God had it be so that the life they expressed was they got to be Hitler or Donald Trump or somebody that didn't take care of their body like that. And when you look at it from a thy will be done perspective, it lends itself to the idea that what we want to perfect here is the idea that we're witnessing what's happening, we're not identified with it. We're witnessing what's happening, we're not identified with it. And the way to look at that and the way to see that is to consider, as you go through your life and go through your day, and you start to experience the emotional up and downs and the stress and all, the stuff that goes on in your life, right? Of course, because of our bad habit of being identified with all that, right? Because of our bad habit of being identified with all that, being identified with the thought process, right? That we live the life that gives us, right? Because of our bad habit of being identified. But all the while you're identifying with that, in the background is awareness, unaffected, totally at peace, totally happy, totally at rest all the time. So you could say that the process here of awakening is catching yourself in the identification with what's not real. Catching yourself. Remember the thing from the Course in Miracles, right? What is not real doesn't exist. Catching yourself identifying with that which is not real. Catching yourself identifying with that which doesn't exist, which is the personality, right? And once you're identified with the personality, you're in the world of the personality. And the world of the personality is the world of thinking, and it's the world of emotions, right? And so that's the interpretation process that goes on all day long, as you're going through your day. And you're identified with thinking, you're identified with emotions, and because of that, you're in a dualistic reality, right? And because of that, you're protecting yourself all the time. You're looking out for threats all the time, and there's a certain amount of stress that develops just because of that, right? Because you have to hold your body in tension, because you have to keep being vigilant all the time, looking for something coming after you, right? So that's the paranoid state that the personality is in. And it's a stressful state, and it has an effect on the physical body. All the more reason to, practice being what you actually are, so that the physical body can begin to communicate effectively with you, right? What do I mean by that? Well, the body is always communicating, isn't it? It's always letting you know what's going on by having pain there, right? That's communication. Pain, hunger, right? The drives, right? All the things in the body are always communicating. The question is, do you hear the communication and do you respond to the communication? If you have pain, you see, if you have pain, the personality just wants to get rid of it, right? Personality just wants to take something to control the pain, numb the pain, stop the experience. I don't want that experience, right? An awake person has pain, and the first thing they do is look to see what's the body asking for. What is the body saying with the pain? You know, if it's pain, the body's communicating something's wrong there. You know, start to look at what's wrong there, what's not functioning correctly. And then you can start to address that so the body can resume its natural state and be in a state of health. You know, Richard Lang, I've mentioned Richard Lang here, and I've mentioned the Headless Way. I really wish more of you would look into that and play around with that a little, because a lot of the experiments that are done, you know, Richard Lang goes to talk all the time to Buddhist meditation centers, you know, and Buddhist communities. He goes to talk all the time to those groups. And the reason he does that is because the work that he is talking about is the same work. It's about the truth. But what Douglas Harding did is he discovered a way of directly experiencing the awareness that you are. And he came up with experiments that you can directly experience the awareness that you are. And so I would really invite you to play around with that. You know, look, Richard recently has put some stuff up on YouTube that is excellent in terms of the talk that he gives. And if you listen to his talk, you'll start to get an idea of what the Headless Way is all about. Or if you go to the Headless Way website and look into that and play with some of those exercises. You know, the pointing exercise is the most famous one, right? That was the first experiment that Douglas Harding came up with. The idea of pointing at, you know, you're pointing at the floor, pointing at the wall, pointing at your knee, pointing at your chest, and then eventually pointing here, and then looking to see what is the finger pointing at when it's pointing at here, because everywhere else it's pointing to a thing, right? An object, right? But when it's pointing to here, it's pointing to what's looking at what is pointing at it. It's pointing to what's looking at what is pointing at it. And what Douglas Harding said is that this is the basis of headlessness. That if you look at what the finger is pointing at here, right, and you don't think about it, if you think about it, you'll say, oh, it's my nose and my face, right? Of course. Right, see, of course. Everybody knows that's what it's pointing at, right? But some freaks, when they point their finger here, say, oh, wow. Because what they see it's pointing at is not what they think, but what the actual experience is of this. The actual experience of this, if you look at what the finger's pointing at and you actually allow yourself to recognize the experience here, not the thought about what's here. The thought about what's here is there's a head here, right? But the experience of what's here right now, as you look through your eyes, what's there? If you look through your eyes right now, what's there? Space, isn't it? Right? Right where your eyes is looking out, and what Douglas said, that there's a single eye, right? When you look out of your eyes, you don't see two different things, do you? No, that's what they call the third eye, by the way, right? There's a single eye that you're seeing through when you look out here. And when you look out here, what you see is you see space. This is space, right? This is space now, becomes space. And when you do these experiments, you do things like this, and it's like, now my hands are disappearing now. You know, they're in space here and they're disappearing, right? That's what's actually happening, right? You know, when you're driving in your car, what's actually happening, you've learned that your car is moving and the world is staying still, right? But if you actually look, when you're driving your car, if you actually look, you can see that the world's moving. Your car is staying still. The world's moving. That's actually what's happening, right? But we've so learned it the other way, right? Just like you've so learned it the other way that you're the personality. And it can all come to an end like that. It can all come to an end like that, because all you have to do is recognize, it's like I said to you the other day, you know, that when you're thinking and you depend on thinking as a way of knowing, right? And you say that I think, what I think is that I've been doing this for a long time and I think it hasn't made a difference, right? And I say to you, how do you know that? How do you know that what you think doesn't make a difference? How do you know that? How do you know that? There must be something other than just thinking that allows you to know that. How do you know that? See, this is where you're stepping over the truth. This is where we step over the truth, right? How you know anything is not that you think it, it's the awareness of thinking it is how you know it. Without the awareness, there's no thinking. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am was a mistake. Because you can't think until you're aware, right? So the awareness is first. All you have to do is let yourself get that that's the case and stop allowing yourself to buy into the thought process as the final word. It's as simple as that. You can look at any time and see it.
Conceptually, I can tell myself that.
Through thought. Yeah. But what about not thought?
I know.
Yeah. What's there without thought? Who are you without thought?
My real self, which is this peaceful, aware person.
Yeah, but that's thought. The only answer to that, and we say things about it, right? But who we all are without thought, the only true answer to that is, I don't know. Really? I mean, you don't. You can't know because who we are without thought is non-conceptual. It's beyond thought. It can't be thought about, right? That's what makes it difficult because you've depended on using thinking to know, right? And so if I use thinking to know and I think about all these things and the things I think about when it comes to spirituality are things that I think I know, well, I still haven't left that domain, right? So you have to, at some point, you have to be willing to leave that domain, you have to be willing to leave that domain. And when the spiritual masters got disinterested in the physical body and so forth, and disinterested in emotions and thinking and all that, one of the ways that's talked about in the more contemporary versions of spirituality is that's talked about in terms of using spirituality as a way of avoiding emotions or as a way of avoiding dealing with the physical body. Yes?
Well, don't you think that's kind of what Alan Watts did?
Yes, it was what Alan Watts did. Yeah, that's what I meant when I was talking about Alan Watts. But he wasn't doing that, he wasn't doing it intentionally. See, in the contemporary way of talking about that, they call it spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing. So in the contemporary way of talking about, they're saying that's an unworkable thing to do. When you wake up, do the psychotherapy. So you can be a healthy personality and a healthy body, not just an awake human being, right? So this is a more contemporary way of understanding these things, right? And a more contemporary way of dealing with these things. That's why I think as a psychologist, in the work that I do with people now, it's called non-dual psychotherapy because it involves both things. It involves developing a deep, direct experience of the truth of who you are. That's the foundation, right? But then we're going to talk about who you're being, which is the personality. So when you come to therapy in a non-dual therapy process, you talk about what's going on in your day, right? And then we start to look at that together and see how much of that is the personality, right? And can you start to practice seeing the personality instead of being the personality? And that's how we utilize it. But even in terms of practicing seeing the personality instead of being the personality, we still talk about how the personality could behave in a more healthy way, how the personality can behave in a more realistic way, right? So there's counseling, there's guidance, right, about it. If you go to a spiritual teacher, that's what they do too, So all of these things come together. The most important thing is you have to understand, just like you said, you're up against, the deck is stacked against you, right? You're up against your brain. You're up against your conditioning, right? And that's running 24/7, right? And so just like Richie Davidson said, your brain is learning 24/7. And so if the personality is running 24/7, it's just deepening the grooves of the personality in the brain, right? And so in meditation, by practicing meditation and starting to recognize that you are not the personality, as that recognition gets stronger and stronger, right? The idea that you are the personality gets weaker and weaker. And therefore the neural patterns get weaker and weaker that are associated with your being the personality. And as they get weaker, and as the experience of yourself as awareness gets stronger, right? You see the world differently, you experience who you are differently, you experience other people differently, and your behavior follows. Your behavior starts to be more realistic, right?